The email arrived on a Monday. It was short. Cold. 4 lines. Dear Nathan. After careful consideration, the board has decided to go with a candidate whose experience more closely aligns with the direction of our future growth. We wish you all the best. Sincerely. John E. Watkins, Board Chair. I stared at the screen. Just like that, 10 years of my life erased. No explanation, no gratitude, no phone call. I'd been the operations director of Halstead Manufacturing in Dayton, Ohio, since 2013. I'd given them weekends, late nights, even my own money at times to keep projects afloat. I built their expansion into Kentucky, negotiated 3 major supplier contracts, and managed to cut production costs by almost 18% over 5 years. I wasn't just good at the job, I was the job. But none of that mattered now. And I had a gut feeling it wasn't about experience. It felt orchestrated. I didn't call my wife right away. Becky was probably at her studio teaching her 9 a.m. yoga class. Or maybe not. Hard to say anymore. Instead, I closed my laptop, walked into the kitchen, and poured myself a cup of stale coffee from the morning pot. Our German shepherd, Daisy, looked up at me from her spot by the window. She wagged her tail once and then went back to sleep. The house was too quiet. By noon, I was still sitting at the kitchen table, trying to process it. What gnawed at me wasn't just the job, it was the precision of the timing. 2 weeks ago, Becky had insisted we push forward with a second mortgage, just a short-term boost, to finish the home remodel. New windows. Heated floors in the master bath. I'd trusted her judgment. She handled most of our finances ever since she started managing freelance contracts for small businesses in the area. She said I was too busy. And she was right. I didn't even question it. But now, that timing sat like a brick in my chest. That afternoon, I called John Watkins. Straight to voicemail. I left a polite message. No response. I tried Mark Hendricks, the CFO. He picked up but was short. Nervous. I'm sorry, Nate. It was above me. I didn't have a say. You were in the room. Not for the vote. That told me everything. I asked, did Becky have anything to do with this? He paused. I think you should talk to her. That silence told me more than any explanation ever could. Becky got home at 5:45 p.m. She wore a tight charcoal workout jacket and carried a pressed smoothie bottle with one of those biodegradable straws. She didn't look tired. Didn't ask how my day was. Just smiled like everything was normal. I said, I lost my job. She blinked. What? I got an email this morning. The board let me go. No warning. Just, done. She sat across from me and folded her hands. I didn't know they'd move that fast. That slip was all I needed. She didn't flinch. Didn't cry. Didn't even feign confusion. She just nodded like we were discussing weather or groceries. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. She had known. Possibly arranged it. Or at least been part of the conversation. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan rotating above me, each turn of the blades marking the seconds I'd lost over the years, the dinners missed, the anniversaries shortened, the mornings where I left before dawn and returned after dusk, just to make sure our life was secure. Stable. Comfortable. Now I was staring into the void of unemployment, with a second mortgage looming and a wife who looked more like a stranger every time she smiled. 2 days later, I got a call from a former colleague, Chris Donnelly. We'd worked closely for years on supply chain logistics. Chris said, I heard what happened. You didn't deserve that. But, off the record, I think you should look at the contract Becky's consulting firm signed with Halstead 3 months ago. I felt my throat tighten. What contract? He paused. I thought you knew. Becky had signed a consulting agreement with Halstead back in March. She'd been working on wellness integration for their HR team, yoga classes, mindfulness sessions, some vague productivity coaching. The deal was worth $9,200 a month. More than I made after taxes. And it was approved by the board 3 weeks before they voted to let me go. When I asked her that night, she didn't even try to lie. She said, I thought you'd be proud. I didn't want to seem like I was stepping on your toes. But the board loved my pitch. Said it was fresh. She used the word fresh like she was marketing kombucha. That's when I stopped talking. I didn't yell. Didn't argue. I just nodded, kissed her on the forehead, and said I needed to take Daisy for a walk. But inside, something shifted. Cold. Precise. I wasn't just betrayed, I was replaced. Not by a better man. But by my own wife. And I was going to find out exactly how deep her betrayal went. Because I knew Becky. And Becky never did anything without a plan. The morning after Becky admitted to the contract, I sat alone on the back porch, coffee going cold in my hand. Daisy was out on the lawn, nose buried in a patch of grass she seemed determined to excavate. I watched the tree line sway in the early wind and tried to make sense of it all. I wasn't angry in the way people assume. Rage is hot. What I felt was glacial. Slow. Heavy. Like sediment pressing down over time. It was the kind of realization that seeps in, layer by layer. My wife, the person I'd built a life with, had been working behind my back with the company I helped build. She didn't just withhold information. She maneuvered around me. Maybe even over me. The more I thought about it, the more the past 6 months began to rearrange themselves in my mind. Becky used to bring me lunch at work. Sometimes she'd linger, talk to the front desk staff, ask casual questions about who was doing what. At the time, I thought she was just being friendly. Now, I wondered if she was collecting intel. Getting the lay of the land. Then there was the remodel. Her push for the second mortgage came after I hesitated on liquidating part of my 401k for her studio's expansion. I told her we needed to slow down, take stock. That week, she had come home with a new financial planner's brochure, someone she'd met through a client. His name was Colin Trask. I never met him. Never even saw a photo. But his business card sat on the fridge for months. Becky had a habit of using phrases that didn't quite fit. She'd say things like forward momentum and strategic alignment, like she was pitching me something rather than talking with me. In hindsight, it all felt rehearsed. She stopped asking about my projects around February. That was when she started staying late at the studio for back-to-back client blocks. The first time it happened, she texted me a photo of her dinner, some quinoa bowl from a local vegan cafe, with a caption, "Fueling up for the grind flexed biceps." I didn't think much of it then. But now I couldn't stop thinking about who took that photo. Was she alone? In March, I came home early from a trip to Cincinnati. A pipe had burst in the warehouse, and I had to cut the visit short. Becky wasn't expecting me. Her car wasn't in the garage, but her yoga mat and water bottle were in the foyer. I assumed she had walked to the studio. She did that sometimes when the weather was good. But when I called, it rang out. She didn't call back for 3 hours. That night, she said she'd been in a deep flow class with no phones allowed. But she didn't teach deep flow on Thursdays. At least, not until that month. She must have seen something in my face because she added, "I switched my schedule, forgot to tell you." That was the first time I remember feeling something fracture, even if I didn't admit it to myself then. After the job loss, I started going through our bank statements. I told her I needed to do a budget reset. She didn't object, she was too confident I wouldn't find anything. Most people think betrayal shows up in big neon signs. But it rarely does. It's a pattern of tiny distortions. I noticed that her credit card payments had doubled since the start of the year. New vendors I didn't recognize. Sonder Hotel, in Cincinnati. Brasserie de El West, in Louisville. None of these cities were near her studio's client base. She'd told me she was doing business development, expanding wellness services regionally. It sounded impressive. Empty, but impressive. At the time, I'd been too buried in end-of-quarter reports to challenge her. When I asked casually what Sonder was, she said it was a yoga mat brand. I nodded. She didn't blink. The lies were paper-thin. But they only worked because I never tried to poke holes. I went to our guest room closet one afternoon. It was where we kept old receipts, tax documents, and manuals for appliances we no longer owned. Buried in one of the files was a thin navy folder with the logo of Trask Financial Consulting. Inside was a typed summary, Joint Investment Portfolio Proposal, Trask/Becky Whitmore. No mention of my name. What caught my eye was the line item titled Exit Plan Strategy, May 2024. It outlined projected cash flows following a marital status change, with asset retention scenarios. There were 3 versions, one with no contest, one with partial dispute, and one marked full legal challenge. The assumptions were chillingly precise. Anticipated value of the house. Liquidation of my retirement. Tax shielding via LLC transfer. I sat down on the edge of the guest bed and read it twice. That night, Becky was all smiles. She made salmon with lemon dill sauce and poured a glass of wine for me without asking. I watched her move around the kitchen, graceful, efficient. I realized she was no longer a person I recognized, she was a campaign in motion. The next morning, I called an old friend, Harold Matthews, a retired attorney from Columbus who used to do contract work for Halstead. I didn't ask for legal advice. I just asked him what he remembered about Colin Trask. He said, "Never trust a man who offers asset protection before you ask." That was all I needed to hear. I began cataloging everything. Dates, charges, names. I took photos of statements, saved copies of emails. I installed a second camera on the back porch. A silent observer, like me. I didn't confront her. Not yet. She was careful, yes, but not careful enough. And she thought I was still in the dark. But I was seeing everything. And the light was about to get very bright. The first time I saw the black Lexus, it was parked 2 blocks down from our house, half tucked beneath the canopy of a maple tree. It was early evening. Becky had just left for what she called her Wednesday alignment class, something that didn't show up on her studio schedule. She took a different gym bag than usual, smaller, no mat. Just a tablet and what looked like a change of clothes. I watched from the upstairs window as she walked down the block, crossed diagonally through the neighbor's yard, an odd path, and slid into the passenger side of the Lexus. The car didn't move immediately. They sat there for about 5 minutes. I couldn't see the driver clearly, but the silhouette was tall, broad-shouldered. Then they pulled off, slow and casual, like they had all the time in the world. Daisy stirred at my feet. I gave her a gentle pat, trying to keep my breathing steady. I didn't follow them. Not yet. I was past the stage of impulsive action. What I needed now was certainty. And that required patience. The next day, I made a quiet visit to the studio under the pretense of dropping off Becky's forgotten phone charger. Her assistant, a 22-year-old named Claire, greeted me with that strained cheerfulness of someone trying to hide unease. She said, "Oh, Becky's actually not here right now. She's doing a private consult off-site." I asked where. Claire hesitated. "I think, near Westwood." But she didn't say exactly. Westwood was 30 minutes west of Dayton, mostly residential, not known for commercial leases. No reason for a studio consult. I left without pressing her. Claire wasn't my target. That afternoon, I combed through Becky's business Instagram. Scattered among the wellness posts and filtered yoga poses were tags from new followers, several with usernames that matched an LLC out of Louisville. One in particular stood out, Trask Performance Consulting. The profile was sparse. Black and white headshot. One post. No listed location. But I recognized the logo, same as the one on the folder in our guest room. The caption beneath the single image read, "Efficiency through alignment. Business and body." It was Becky's phrasing, almost verbatim. I started cross-referencing names through public records. Ohio's business search portal showed Trask LLC had registered 2 addresses, one in Louisville, the other as a P.O. box just north of Dayton. Then I hit something interesting, a property record for a duplex in Beaver Creek, purchased 6 months ago under an entity titled Align West Holdings. The registered agent? Colin Trask. The second listed owner? Rebecca Whitmore. That night, she came home late. Said her session had gone long, but the client was really opening up. She didn't know I'd already seen the purchase document. She didn't know I'd already pulled the deed and mortgage agreement. She didn't know I'd already noted the down payment had been wired from our joint account, $38,200, on the same day I approved the second mortgage. What struck me most wasn't the theft. It was the audacity. She hadn't even bothered to forge my name. Just moved money from the shared account she controlled, then buried the trail beneath vague tax terms and investment language. The next morning, I logged into our main bank account. She'd changed the password. I requested a statement by mail instead. That would take a few days, but I needed something physical. Something admissible. Meanwhile, I called Chris Donnelly again. He worked under a corporate shell now, freelancing logistics for several firms across state lines. I asked if he knew whether Halstead had a wellness contract on the books. He said, "That's been buried under HR expenditure. It doesn't show as an outside vendor. It's coded internally." So not only had Becky secured a contract, she had it disguised as an in-house program. Likely through a board member. Someone she charmed. Maybe someone she was seeing. I asked him offhandedly, "Who's driving the black Lexus these days?" He laughed. "You mean Watkins' weekend car?" John Watkins. Board chair. The same man who signed my termination letter. Married, 3 kids, 30 years in manufacturing. He was also the man Becky used to joke about, called him Mr. Protein Powder, because of his posturing at company events. So it wasn't just professional sabotage. It was personal. That weekend, Becky said she needed a little solo retreat. A new client had offered their lake house outside Lexington for the weekend. She left Saturday morning before sunrise. By 8 a.m., I was in the attic, pulling down the storage boxes we hadn't touched since the first remodel. Among the Christmas lights and old taxes, I found a thin stack of Becky's early drafts for wellness packages. Most were in her handwriting, diagrams, phrasing, lists of potential client types. At the bottom of one list was a name, JW, high risk/high influence. She had profiled him. Like a mark. That evening, I did something I never thought I'd do. I emailed a private investigator. The man came recommended through Harold Matthews, said he used to do quiet work for divorces where NDAs and reputations were on the line. We met Sunday. I gave him a single task, track Becky's movements, especially when she left town. No confrontation. No interference. Just documentation. He said it would take a week. I gave him cash. Becky returned Sunday evening, glowing. Said the retreat was incredible and that she'd had a chance to recenter. I nodded. She poured a glass of kombucha, asked if I wanted any. I declined. She said, "You seem quiet." I replied, "Just focused." And I was. Focused on watching a web unravel, one lie at a time. Because now I knew she wasn't just cheating with a man. She was cheating with a plan. And I was going to unmake it, with the same silence she thought made her invisible. The first report from the investigator arrived Thursday morning, slipped into a plain manila envelope and dropped discreetly in the locked mailbox I had installed myself 10 years ago, back when privacy still mattered for different reasons. It was brief but damning. On the surface, Becky's solo retreat had been anything but. The photos showed her and John Watkins checking into a lakeside Airbnb under an alias, M. West. A private rental, no hotel staff, no paper trail under her name. 3 days. 1 car. 1 bedroom. But what caught my eye wasn't just the affair. It was the box of documents she carried in, clearly labeled with the logo of Trask Financial. The photo captured her mid-step, the expression on her face focused, not affectionate. She wasn't there for love. She was there for business. Becky had always been calculated. She used emotion like a currency, spent it in precise amounts to buy trust, deflect questions, or cloud intention. But the logistics of the scheme were now becoming clear. Watkins wasn't just her lover. He was her asset. By Friday, I'd secured a consultation with a new attorney. Not a divorce lawyer, not yet. This one specialized in corporate forensics and financial shielding. I didn't need to blow things up. I needed to prepare, surgically and without notice. We met in a nondescript office park on the edge of town. The lawyer, Gwen Anders, had the demeanor of someone who thrived on risk mitigation. She didn't flinch when I laid out what I'd found. She just asked for dates, account numbers, and written records. I gave her everything. She said, "You're going to need to move your assets, quietly. Rollovers. Trusts. Anything jointly held, we freeze until further notice. Do not confront her. Not yet." That weekend, I followed her advice. I initiated a silent withdrawal from my primary IRA, transferring it into a newly formed individual trust. I closed the credit card we shared and opened 2 separate accounts in my name only. I rerouted my unemployment deposits to the new account and redirected all digital statements to an encrypted email. Most importantly, I met with a forensic accountant. Her name was Maureen. She was blunt, efficient, and understood what to look for. She pulled up Becky's digital payment patterns over the last 9 months, matching vendor charges to known aliases and shell companies tied to Trask. What emerged was a flowchart of money laundering dressed in yoga language, consulting payments, creative wellness deductions, a bogus retreat scholarship program that funneled money from our joint account into Align West Holdings, where Becky was now listed as managing partner. The kicker: her signature on the business formation documents didn't match the ones on our mortgage. It was looser, more fluid. Forged. Or at least deliberately inconsistent. That gave us leverage. Meanwhile, I kept my behavior unchanged at home. Polite. Distant. Unremarkable. I cooked dinner. I cleaned the yard. I took Daisy for long walks around the block. Becky barely noticed. Her focus was elsewhere. She started making phone calls late at night, whispering in the guest room with the door closed. I didn't interrupt. I just slid a recorder under the dresser the following day. Over the course of a week, I gathered 4 calls. 1 with Watkins, 2 with Trask, and 1, surprisingly, with a bank compliance officer in Kentucky. She was laying groundwork to separate herself from the liability of the shared account. She used phrases like anticipated transition, prior authorization under duress, and post-marital property clarification. Her language wasn't just legal, it was rehearsed. Gwen had warned me, this is a long game. She's not looking for a payout. She's looking for control. That makes her more dangerous. So I started feeding her what she wanted to see. I let her believe I was stuck. That I hadn't found another job. That I was depressed. Weak. She offered to help with bills, transferred a small amount of money to my card, and told me, we just need to stay aligned. It was all bait. And she thought I'd swallowed it. But behind the scenes, I was compiling a dossier. I created a master folder, hard copy, off-site, containing everything. Photo evidence. Banking irregularities. Recorded calls. Copies of property deeds. LLC ownership transfers. All backed by timestamps and notarized summaries from Maureen and Gwen. The final piece came from Chris Donnelly. He called me in a hushed voice, said, Becky submitted a proposal to take over as Director of Internal Wellness, full-time, salaried. It's already in draft HR review. She's quoting her role as instrumental in corporate culture re-engineering. Uses metrics from your old department. She was positioning herself as my replacement, officially now. Not just as a consultant or lover of a board member, but as a legacy builder. She was planning to convert her fraud into credibility. That weekend, I requested a meeting with Halstead's outside legal auditor. They owed me nothing, I was no longer employed. But I didn't come empty-handed. I handed over a sanitized version of the dossier, only what pertained to the company. Internal fraud. Undisclosed conflicts of interest. Board impropriety. Misuse of funds. I omitted the affair. This wasn't about bitterness. It was about integrity. The auditor was stunned. Not because of the content, but because of how quietly I had collected it. He said it would initiate an internal review. I nodded and left. I didn't need to see what happened next. I only needed them to know I existed. That someone had been watching. Someone with evidence. Someone who wouldn't blink. Back home, Becky was packing for a 3-day Women's Resilience Summit in Indianapolis. I wished her well. She hugged me with one arm, distracted. I let her go. Because I had already filed the IRS whistleblower form that morning, flagging Align West Holdings for undeclared income and suspicious transfers. The wheels were moving now. Slow, deliberate. Just like she taught me. But the difference was, I wasn't building a brand. I was building a trap. The call came on a Tuesday morning. It was Gwen. She said, they opened the file. Quiet internal panic. Legal compliance was looped in this morning. That was all she needed to say. Halstead's outside legal team had begun quietly digging into Becky's contract, her company's payment structure, and the board's decision process around my termination. Gwen had only handed them what was unavoidably tied to their liability, enough to force them into action without tipping off Becky or Watkins. 2 days later, Maureen flagged something odd in the flow of payments to Align West Holdings. A separate wire transfer had come through from an account in Arizona. Not business-related. Not even logically placed in her usual network. It traced back to a subsidiary holding of Trask Consulting's early clients, a man listed as D.M. Carruthers. Gwen's contacts confirmed Carruthers was once under federal scrutiny for pension fraud back in 2012. Charges dropped, sealed. Nothing public. But his name showing up here meant Becky's network wasn't just opportunistic, it was tactical. She wasn't just rebranding herself. She was laying a pipeline into shell companies that trafficked in gray zone money. And she was using my name, still, to legitimize some of the transactions on old joint accounts that had not yet been legally frozen. One of the wire descriptions simply read, Client withdrawal, Nathan Whitmore Trust Proxy. She'd forged a document. The signature was close. But it wasn't mine. Not even a traced version. It was a digital mimic. And it had been used to authorize a pull of $11,400 from a real estate reserve account Gwen had moved weeks prior. She didn't just overreach. She committed fraud. Maureen confirmed the document ID didn't match the bank's signature verification records. Which meant we could prove not only that Becky had misrepresented a business partnership, but that she'd impersonated me using financial tools under false pretense. It also meant we could involve law enforcement, if we wanted to. But Gwen wanted more than a simple arrest. She said, "We wait. She's getting bolder. She'll cross a line that implicates Watkins and the board directly. That's when we pounce." So we let her keep walking forward. That weekend, Becky hosted a small event at her studio. Foundations of Power, she called it. Branded it as a leadership retreat for women entering corporate wellness roles. It was marketed on social media with slick branding and vague empowerment slogans. But what stood out was the guest list. 3 of the attendees were minor figures on Halstead's operations team. One was a niece of a regional HR rep, 2 others worked under Trask's newest branch in Louisville. She wasn't just climbing the ladder. She was building her own. At the event, she announced, very publicly, that Align West would be expanding into Cincinnati and Nashville. She hinted at private funding. She never mentioned the fake trust withdrawal, the wire fraud, or the forged signature. But now she was in violation of SEC rules. You can't announce expansion on private capital that doesn't exist. Especially when that capital was removed illegally from a jointly governed account under fraudulent documents. And then came the final misstep. Becky filed to change the deed on the Beaver Creek duplex. Quietly. Just a standard title update, removing my name entirely, despite the original mortgage draw coming from our shared asset pool. The form was submitted under property simplification in event of divorce. There had been no divorce filing. The county office flagged it, and called me directly. I drove down the next day. Gwen met me there. We presented the original deed copy, the notarized mortgage documents, and the bank records confirming the funds used for the down payment. The county clerk pulled the pending form. Becky had signed my name again. This time, sloppier. Rushed. Not even close to the right pen pressure or flow. They suspended the update. Logged it as a potential fraud. That same evening, the private investigator sent me his final report. Photos. Times. Maps. And 1 audio clip. Becky and Watkins, together in his condo in downtown Dayton, not the lake house this time. She was laughing. Casual. Bragging. She said, "Once this goes through, he'll be too distracted to fight. I'll close out the accounts before he even files." She didn't know I already had. The audio was clear. It named Watkins, Trask, even Carruthers. She referenced fake accounts, short-term tax shelters, and the use of bridge language, her term for the lies she'd told me to keep me docile. That night, I transferred everything. All files. All evidence. The full dossier. I sent 1 copy to Halstead's board. Another to the IRS field office in Cincinnati. 1 to the Ohio State Financial Authority. And 1 to the Dayton office of the FBI. I didn't include threats. No demands. Just a simple cover letter. This is not an act of revenge. It is a record of fraud, forgery, and financial abuse. Please investigate accordingly. I signed it with my real name. The next morning, Becky noticed something was off. She said, "Did you change the bank login again?" I replied, "No." "Why?" She stared at me, trying to read something on my face. But I had nothing left to give her. No anger. No pretense. She didn't ask again. By noon, her phone began buzzing. 2 calls. Then 3. She stepped outside. Took them on the porch. I watched through the window, her body tense, pacing. She was unraveling. Not from guilt. From exposure. She came back in pale. I said nothing. She didn't eat that night. The next morning, she didn't leave for the studio. And I knew, it had begun. The first knock came 4 days later. Mid-morning. I was in the garage fixing the hinges on a cabinet door Becky had insisted we replace months ago but never followed through on. It was rhythmic, professional. Not the uncertain knock of a neighbor. Not the impatient rap of a delivery. I opened the door and found 2 men in charcoal windbreakers. Plain. Functional. The taller one showed his badge. Special Agent Morse, FBI. This is Agent Kelly. We're following up on a financial misconduct report involving a Rebecca Whitmore. Are you Nathan Whitmore? I nodded. Stepped back. Invited them in. They didn't sit. Didn't offer false smiles or conversational warm-up. Morse spoke with the calm of someone used to seeing people fall apart in front of him. He said, "We're investigating potential wire fraud, forgery, and interstate financial misrepresentation involving several LLCs tied to Ms. Whitmore and her associates. You submitted a report with corroborating evidence. We've reviewed it. We need to ask a few clarifying questions." I answered everything. Clean. Precise. Unemotional. The agents didn't interrupt. Kelly took notes. Morse asked only what was needed. By the time they left, they had requested copies of the original trust forms Becky had forged, the recording from her conversation with Watkins, and a full export of the emails between Becky and Trask. 2 days later, Gwen confirmed the IRS had frozen the Align West Holdings accounts. Not seized, just paused. That meant Becky couldn't move money, withdraw funds, or issue payments from her supposed wellness expansion. That same morning, Halstead issued an internal memo. Someone leaked it. Gwen forwarded me a copy. It read, in part, effective immediately, all wellness consulting contracts initiated through internal referral from current or former board members will be placed under administrative review. Pending audit, the Director of Internal Wellness position is suspended. It didn't mention Becky by name. But it didn't have to. Her face wasn't on the website anymore. The press release she was preparing for the Nashville expansion never went live. Then came the subpoena. A process server knocked at 6:43 p.m., just as Becky was pulling a casserole from the oven. I heard the exchange through the open window. Rebecca Whitmore? Yes. You've been served. I watched from the hallway as she froze with the manila envelope in her hand. For a moment, she didn't move. Just stood there, the heat from the oven fogging the glass on her glasses. She closed the door slowly. Carried the envelope to the dining table. Opened it. Scanned. And then she looked up, not at me, but through me. She knew. The next morning, her car was gone before I woke up. No note. No message. By noon, Gwen called. Watkins had resigned from the Halstead board. Quietly. No press release. No farewell event. Just a vague internal email citing health reasons and family obligations. Chris later told me Watkins had been confronted by the audit team with a list of payments, including those routed through Becky's consulting front, that could not be explained by any approved budget process. The board had given him a choice: step down or face a public review. He chose the back door. That same week, a cease and desist order was filed against Trask Consulting. They had 72 hours to present clean financial records or risk seizure of all assets tied to the interstate expansion deal. I didn't hear from Becky. Not until the following Monday. She came home around 10 a.m. Her hair was pulled back. No makeup. No expression. She walked into the living room, stood near the bookshelf, and said, "They know." I didn't reply. She sat down. Slowly. As if her legs might not hold. She said, "I never meant to hurt you." Still, I said nothing. She tried again, "It got away from me." The silence stretched. Eventually, she stood and went upstairs. Packed. Methodically. She didn't ask for help. Didn't cry. Just zipped up 2 suitcases and carried them out one at a time. The front door closed behind her. An hour later, Gwen texted. Charges had been filed against Trask: tax evasion, document forgery, and failure to comply with federal financial disclosure laws. He'd been detained at the Louisville airport trying to board a flight to Denver. His laptop was seized. Inside were digital files bearing Becky's name, financial statements, identity proxies, and copies of trust templates with signatures that resembled mine. A week later, I was called to testify. Not in court. Not yet. Just in a federal deposition. Standard protocol. The room was cold. Bright. Clinical. I recounted everything: the financial withdrawals, the signature discrepancies, the disguised LLCs, the real estate transfer attempts. The agents asked only once if I wanted to pursue criminal charges against Becky directly. I declined to answer. Gwen would handle that part. The truth was, I didn't care what happened to her. Not anymore. I wasn't looking for punishment. I wasn't even looking for closure. I was simply restoring a balance that had been stolen. By the end of that month, the duplex had been flagged for asset review, placed under potential seizure due to being used in a fraudulent transaction. Becky no longer held title. The IRS had placed a lien. Align West Holdings had ceased all operations. Watkins sold his condo and relocated to his brother's property in rural Michigan. Becky's studio was shuttered. Her website went offline. Her professional email returned a bounce message. The last I heard, she was living with an old college friend in Columbus. I hadn't spoken to her since the day she packed her bags. I didn't need to. Her silence said enough. It's strange how quiet the world feels when the noise stops. For weeks, I'd lived with tension folded into every corner of the house, in the steps Becky took across the tile, the pauses before she answered a question, the rustle of envelopes containing half-truths. Now there was only silence. The kind that doesn't scream or whisper. It just is. Becky hadn't come back. No calls. No emails. No letters. Her name remained on some official documents, but Gwen was managing all of that now. The rest of her life, the curated image, the planned expansion, the yoga empire wrapped in soft words and forged lines, had crumbled. In the following months, I settled into routines. I cooked again. Cleaned. Cut the grass. Small things that didn't demand strategy or caution. Daisy followed me everywhere. She adjusted faster than I thought she would. Dogs are simple. They trust the present. The house stayed quiet. But it didn't feel empty. I took a part-time logistics role with a small shipping firm based out of Kettering. Low pressure. Good people. No board politics, no silent ambushes. Just clean numbers and trucks that moved on time. Chris Donnelly and I met for coffee twice. He said Halstead had replaced most of the board, quietly and without ceremony. Watkins had signed a non-disclosure in exchange for being spared a public audit. No criminal charges filed, not yet, but reputations don't survive sealed records anymore. He was functionally erased. Trask was still awaiting trial. His assets frozen. His clients scattered. Several were filing civil claims of their own. Last I heard, he was pleading for a reduced sentence in exchange for cooperation. Gwen called in late spring to say the final lien against the Beaver Creek duplex had cleared. The IRS had decided to seize and liquidate the property as part of its restitution process. I wouldn't see that money, not directly, but it was a win in a broader sense. Becky wouldn't, either. By summer, the divorce was official. Gwen handled it end to end. I signed where I needed to, didn't contest anything. Becky didn't request anything beyond what she knew wouldn't hold up. There were no hearings. No mediation. Just 2 signatures and a judge's seal. I stayed in the house. Changed nothing. Not out of nostalgia, but because it no longer held her shape. Once deception is stripped away, even familiar walls can breathe again. One day in June, I found a letter in the mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper. Handwritten. It said, "I thought I was doing what I had to do. I told myself it was survival. But you never deserved it. You didn't scream. You didn't fall apart. You saw everything. I hope you find something better." There was no name. But I didn't need one. I folded the letter once, placed it in the drawer where I kept receipts and spare keys, and never opened it again. Some people would have called what I did revenge. I didn't see it that way. I exposed what needed to be seen. I used no leverage she hadn't built herself. I broke nothing. I simply removed the illusion she'd used to cover her actions. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just the absence of further harm. One afternoon, I walked into my backyard and stood in the center of the lawn, eyes closed. No cameras. No plans. Just air. Just light. And I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I'd been betrayed. Professionally erased. Quietly replaced by someone who believed charm and manipulation could substitute for integrity. And I'd rebuilt my life without shouting once. The war was over. Not won, not in the cinematic sense. But ended. With precision. On my terms. Subscribe if you want more stories about real men who don't scream. They act. Coldly. To the end.